Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to try to unpack something pretty massive,
Yeah.
the UK's Data Use and Access Bill. And we're going to be looking at it specifically from a business perspective.
It's a pretty dense piece of legislation.
It is, yeah. It's huge EE. And I know most people listening don't exactly have time to, wade through hundreds of pages of legal jargon. So
We'll try to break it down.
yeah, we're going to try to pull out the key things, the need-to-knows.
The nuggets.
Yeah. Just from skimming the table of contents, I was already kind of overwhelmed. Customer data, business data, digital verification, even regulations for street apparatus.
It's pretty broad scope.
Yeah, how does it all connect? And, what's the real impact going to be for businesses?
Well, I think one of the most interesting things about this bill is it's not just about data protection like a lot of previous legislation. It's really trying to create this whole new playing field for how data is accessed and used, especially by businesses.
Yeah, and there's this really strong emphasis on regulation, right?
Yeah.
Who gets to make the rules, who enforces them, what kind of power they have. And then on top of that, you've got this whole new information commission being created, like a new watchdog in the data world. I mean, what does this mean for companies that are already just trying to, keep their heads above water with all the existing data protection laws?
Yeah, it's going to be a lot to adapt to, for sure.
I think a good place to start might be to just kind of unpack how this bill impacts data sharing, because that seems to be where, the rubber really meets the road for businesses.
Yeah, that's the core of it.
Okay, so part one is called Access to Customer Data and Business Data.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty straightforward.
On the surface, yeah.
But when we actually dug into it, there are some pretty significant implications there.
Definitely. One of the most controversial aspects is the power the bill gives to the Secretary of State to basically issue regulations that force companies to share customer data.
Whoa, hold on. Does that mean anybody can just go to a company and be like, hey, give me all your data on this person? What about competition? Could, a rival business demand access to my customer list?
Yeah, that's a big concern, and a lot of businesses are asking that question. The bill does allow for data sharing with what it calls third-party recipients, and the criteria for who those recipients can be is a little bit murky right now. It'll depend on how specific regulations are developed, so companies need to keep a close eye on that.
So there's a potential upside here, right? For some businesses, having access to more data could be a way to, fuel innovation or create new market opportunities. But then there's this whole other side of the coin. Competitive fairness, potential for data misuse.
Yeah, it's a trade-off, and it's not just customer data we're talking about here. Section 4 of the bill has similar provisions for business data. The Secretary of State, or the Treasury, could actually mandate companies to publish or share their own internal information.
So we're talking potentially sensitive financial information, operational data, even trade secrets, all subject to these regulations. That's kind of scary.
Yeah, it's definitely a big shift from the traditional focus on data protection to this new emphasis on data access and sharing.
Okay, but it's not a total free-for-all, right?
Yeah.
The bill does mention some safeguards.
Yeah, they're trying to walk a tightrope. There's a big emphasis in the bill on balancing data access with the need to protect business interests and, of course, consumer privacy. For example, the bill explicitly says that regulators have to consider the impact on customers, data holders, and especially small and micro businesses when they're putting these regulations together.
Okay, so at least they're acknowledging the potential downsides and trying to build in some protections.
Right. It's not just a blanket share all your data situation.
But how is this data sharing actually going to work in practice? I mean, it sounds pretty complicated.
Well, that's where these interface bodies come in. It's a kind of a strange term, but based
That's
out
very
of
technical.
Yeah, think of them as kind of like the air traffic controllers of the data world.
Okay, so they're going to be managing all this, data exchange.
Yeah, they'll be responsible for the technical infrastructure, the standards for data sharing, making sure everything runs smoothly and securely, and they'll have some power behind them too.
So they're not just tech support, right? They actually have some teeth.
Yeah. The bill gives them pretty significant powers, actually, including setting requirements for data sharing, monitoring compliance, and they can even impose financial penalties if companies don't play by the rules.
Wow, so there are real consequences for businesses that, try to cut corners or just ignore this bill altogether. And then you get into the nitty-gritty of, these penalties in sections 15 and 16, right?
Exactly. They outline how interface bodies can calculate and impose these fines, and also clarify how much say the Secretary of State has in setting those maximum penalty amounts. So it's serious stuff.
Yeah, the message is pretty clear. Data, governance, and compliance are more important than ever. Businesses can't afford to just bury their heads in the sand on this one.
Not if they want to stay in business. It's
Yeah.
not just about, general data sharing principles. There are certain sectors that are getting like really specific attention.
Yeah, like the financial services industry.
Yeah.
That definitely jumped out at me. When I got to those sections dealing with financial data, I was like, uh-oh. It seems like they're giving the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, a lot of power here.
Yeah. Sections 13 and 14 are essentially giving the FCA the authority to create their own interface rules for financial data.
Okay.
So they get to dictate how information is exchanged between providers and, all these other entities.
So on top of all the general data sharing requirements we were just talking about, now financial institutions have this whole other layer of regulations they have to worry about coming from the FCA.
Right.
Compliance is going to get exponentially more complicated.
Yeah. It's a lot to juggle, but the bill does recognize that financial data is, especially sensitive. It needs more tailored oversight.
Yeah.
But it does, like you said, create a pretty complex web of rules that firms are going to have to figure out.
What kind of impact could these FCA rules have, though? I mean, what are we actually talking about here?
Well, you could imagine the FCA mandating open banking data sharing on a scale we haven't seen before,
Okay.
or requiring, companies to share customer data with fintech startups to encourage innovation. I mean, there are all sorts of possibilities, and the ripple effects could be huge.
It's interesting because it's either this incredible opportunity for, the more nimble fintech companies to kind of come in and disrupt things, or it's a regulatory nightmare for the more traditional banks who are already struggling to kind of keep up with the pace of change.
Yeah, probably a bit of both.
Yeah.
The key is, I think, financial institutions need to be proactive. They need to engage with the FCA, really understand how this landscape is changing, and make sure they're prepared to actually comply with these new rules.
Okay, so from banking to digital passports, Part 2 of the bill dives into digital verification services.
Is this like the UK's move toward a mandatory digital ID system?
Not mandatory, but it's laying the groundwork for a pretty big shift in how we verify our identities online.
Okay.
The goal is to set up a trust framework for digital identity verification. So basically a way to make sure that online identities are reliable and secure.
So like a digital driver's license.
Exactly, like a digital driver's license or a passport, but for, all kinds of online interactions.
Okay.
And of course, businesses offering these services are going to have to, play by the rules.
Right.
They'll have to get certified under this framework, prove they meet certain security and reliability standards. And there's this DVS register mentioned in Section 32, which is going to be maintained by the Secretary of State. This seems like a pretty big deal if you're a company that's, in the identity verification space.
Yeah, absolutely. This has the potential to create a whole new market for secure digital identity solutions. I mean, imagine seamlessly proving your age to access online services, opening a bank account with a few clicks, or even voting online securely.
That sounds incredibly convenient.
Yeah.
But also a little bit like Big Brother-ish, to be honest. What about data privacy? I mean, and what happens if a company gets kicked off this DVS register?
Yeah, those are good points. The bill, it does lay out the procedures for deregistering providers and what the penalties are for noncompliance in sections 41 and 42.
Okay.
This is a high-stakes game, and companies need to be very careful about data security and making sure they're following the rules, because otherwise they could lose their registration.
Yeah. Okay, from digital identities to street apparatus.
That was a bit of a head-scratcher.
Yeah, I have to admit this was the part of the bill that kind of threw me for a loop. It was like, what?
Seems random, but it makes sense.
Okay, so Part 3, the National Underground Asset Register, or NUAR for short, basically wants to create this centralized digital database of everything that's buried under our streets, cables, pipes, you name it.
Yeah, all the infrastructure that's hidden away.
So instead of relying on dusty old maps and paper records, now construction companies, utility providers, they'll have this real-time digital platform that shows them exactly what's underground before they start digging.
Exactly, which could be huge for, anyone who's involved in planning construction, maintenance work, anything that interacts with all that underground infrastructure.
Yeah.
could prevent costly mistakes, improve efficiency, reduce safety risks. I mean, it's a big deal.
Yeah, but then it also brings up data-related questions,
Yeah.
right? Like, what kind of information are companies going to be required to share, and who's actually going to have access to all this data?
Yeah, good questions. So sections 106A and 106B go into the details of the data sharing obligations for the companies that are responsible for this infrastructure.
Okay.
They call them undertakers in the bill.
Undertakers.
Yeah. They'll basically have to provide a complete inventory of their assets' location, type, depth, all the relevant details.
So is this like going to be publicly available? Like, can I go online and like see what's buried under my house?
The bill, it encourages data sharing, but it also recognizes that some of this information could be sensitive.
Right.
So there will probably be some restrictions to prevent, people from getting their hands on information that could compromise security or critical infrastructure.
Right. You wouldn't want to give like bad actors a roadmap to, disrupt essential services.
Exactly. So it's about finding that balance between transparency and security.
We've covered a lot, but there's one big piece of the puzzle we haven't talked about yet. The Information Commission.
Yeah, that's where the bill gets really serious about data protection. Part 5, data protection and privacy. That's where they establish the Information Commission, outline its powers, and what it's responsible for. It's a major development in the UK's approach to data governance.
It feels like they're setting up like a superpowered watchdog
Yeah.
to oversee this entire data landscape.
Yeah.
What was the thinking behind creating this new commission?
Well, I think the bill recognizes that data protection isn't just about keeping information secure anymore. It's about managing this incredibly complex ecosystem of data access, sharing, and how it's being used.
Right. And you need a dedicated independent body that can actually enforce the rules and kind of keep everybody in line.
Right. Someone to be the referee. And businesses need to understand this Information Commission isn't, just some figurehead.
Right, right.
They actually have some teeth.
Okay, give me the rundown. What can this commission actually do?
So Section 114 gets into the nitty-gritty of, how they operate, how members are appointed, what their powers are, all of that. And those powers are pretty broad. They can investigate data breaches, issue enforcement notices, and even impose, pretty hefty penalties for non-compliance.
So they're not messing around. This is a wake-up call for any company out there that's been kind of dragging their feet on data protection or maybe playing fast and loose with the rules.
Yeah, definitely. The Information Commission could really reshape the whole data landscape, and businesses need to be ready to adapt.
Now, beyond setting up this new commission, the bill also makes some very specific changes to existing data protection laws. What are some of the big ones there?
One key area is how they handle personal data breaches.
Okay.
The bill amends the Privacy and Electronic Communications Regulations, or PCR, to shorten the notification timelines.
Oh, interesting. So if a company has a data breach, they have less time to report it.
Exactly. Under the new rules, companies would have to notify the Information Commissioner within 72 hours of becoming aware of a breach.
72 hours. That's a pretty tight deadline.
It is. So, companies are going to need to have really solid incident response plans in place to be able to meet that requirement.
Yeah. No more sweeping data breaches under the rug.
Nope. Transparency and quick action are going to be key. And if a company misses that 72-hour window, they're going to have to provide a very detailed explanation as to why.
Okay, so the pressure is on to detect and respond to breaches quickly. Anything else in the data protection realm that businesses should be aware of?
Yeah, so remember those annoying cookie pop-ups?
Oh, yeah.
The ones you get on almost every website?
Please tell me they're getting rid of those.
Well, not entirely, but the bill's trying to streamline that whole consent process for cookies, so hopefully it'll be a little bit less disruptive.
Okay.
Section 111 of the bill amends PCR to allow for more flexible ways to get that cookie consent, so we might see a shift towards, approaches that are a bit more user-friendly.
Right. Respect privacy without bombarding you with like 10 pop-ups every time you visit a website.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a step in the right direction for sure. What else?
The bill also tackles this increasingly important issue of automated decision-making.
Okay, so this is where like algorithms and AI are being used to make decisions that impact individuals.
Right. Think about things like loan approvals, job applications, or even content filtering on social media.
Right. Rise of the machines, right?
Yeah.
But seriously, that stuff can have a huge impact on people's lives. So we need to make sure there are safeguards in place.
Absolutely. So the bill's trying to make sure that these automated decisions are being made fairly and transparently.
Okay.
Companies would be required to tell people how these decisions are being made and give individuals the right to challenge those decisions.
So it's not like a total ban on AI decision-making, but it's about, adding layers of accountability and
Mhm.
making sure that bias doesn't creep into these systems.
Exactly. It's a proactive way to regulate AI, trying to balance, encouraging innovation while also protecting individual rights.
Right, right. Okay, we've covered a ton of ground here. This bill is massive, but let's try to boil it down to, like, the essentials. What are the, like, key takeaways for businesses listening?
Okay, so first and foremost, I think it's clear that data obligations are increasing significantly,
Hmm.
especially when it comes to sharing customer and business data. Companies really need to make sure they understand these new responsibilities and that they can actually comply.
It's not just about protecting data anymore. It's about, sharing it responsibly and in a controlled way. And that's a pretty big shift for a lot of businesses, I think.
Yeah, it's a new mindset. Second, I think the bill does create some new opportunities, particularly in that digital verification services sector.
Right.
So, companies that are providing identity verification, things like that, they could see some real growth as this market starts to develop.
Yeah, it feels like there's like a whole new frontier opening up, and
Mm,
businesses need to be ready to like jump in and seize those opportunities.
definitely. Third, I think navigating the complexities of these regulations is going to be really, really important. The bill gives a lot of power to the Secretary of State and other bodies to issue like very specific regulations,
Hmm.
and that could impact a lot of different sectors in different ways. So staying informed and being able to adapt quickly to those evolving regulations, that's going to be key.
Yeah, falling behind on that can be pretty costly, I imagine.
For sure. And finally, I think the creation of this information commission is a really big deal. It's a very powerful watchdog with a lot of authority, and businesses need to understand how that commission works, what powers it has, and how it's going to enforce those powers.
Yeah, it feels like the rules of the game are really changing. And businesses that want to thrive in this new data-driven world, they've got to adapt and, get ahead of the curve.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This bill, it's trying to strike a really delicate balance between encouraging data access, innovation, while also ensuring data protection and privacy.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, it really is. And ultimately, its success is going to depend on how well businesses, the government, and this new information commission, how well they all work together to kind of navigate this really complex landscape.
Well, this has been a fascinating, albeit very dense, deep dive.
Yeah.
And it's definitely one that we'll be revisiting as things evolve, because the long-term consequences for the UK's digital economy, I think, are still very much unfolding.
Yeah, we've only just scratched the surface here, but hopefully this gives our listeners, a good foundation to start thinking about how this bill might impact their own businesses.
Absolutely. Stay informed, engage in the conversation, and be prepared to adapt. Great advice. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Thanks for having me.
And be sure to tune in to future episodes as we continue to, explore this ever-evolving data landscape.